Hey, I have to start out with Dora Starbird, who lives in Florida, and she turned 105 years old on Christmas Eve, 2022. When interviewed, she said her memories with loved ones are what she cherishes the most in her 105 years of life. Am I making memories to cherish with my loved ones? Are you? When my marriage was on the rocks, I wasn't. These are times I'd rather forget. Neither of us was bringing out the best in each other, but my pervading thought was always that this was worth fighting for because our relationships are what we get to take with us, even after this life. And I wanted a life and marriage full of cherished memories like Dora. I just couldn't figure out how to do it. I didn't know why I was thinking and feeling and behaving in the ways that I didn't like. That is why I am so passionate about helping others with the same dilemma. In last week's podcast, we discussed two women. We discussed Elizabeth and Mary, who both became pregnant miraculously. Their experiences apply to us. Their pregnancies are proof that we can also expect the impossible with God. Our prophet has told us to seek and expect miracles. Can we overcome our weaknesses? Can our spouses overcome theirs? Can we mend our broken hearts? Can they bend theirs? Can our marriages improve, change, and become the marriages we desire? The answer to all these questions can be a resounding yes. This week, we are reading in Matthew 2 and Luke 2 from the New Testament, and I can't wait to dive in. There is so much to learn relating to marriage. Starting off where we left off, with the help of angels and heavenly insight, Joseph and Mary are now married. As we discussed last week, their courtship had unexpected twists and turns. We learn in our next chapters of study, their challenges have just begun. In these two chapters, both Mary and Joseph reveal even more what they are made of and who they are. One trait that sticks out to me in these chapters is that they both had tremendous courage. They were so incredibly brave. We get to see the birth of the Savior unfold from the beginning to the end in a few verses. We know everything turns out all right, but take a moment to imagine living it. I'm sure they trusted in God and his plan, but both Mary and Joseph were mortal. They were human. They must have worked through some anxiety over traveling far from home and family, finding no place to rest while Mary was in labor, and not knowing anyone. Especially pertinent would have been one experienced in helping with the delivery and birth. They may have wished things had been different. I think we'd all agree this was not an ideal situation. I know a little about anxiety provoking experiences. This past year, my 17-year-old son came home from a tennis match and he started twitching involuntarily. And I was concerned, but he just blew it off, saying it was a hard match and he was tired, but he had won. So I let it go. My husband was out of town for the week in another state, and this ended up being hard because the next day my son came home from school at lunch and couldn't get out of the bar stool to walk. And then he collapsed. He was barely able to walk to the car. And we spent some time in our local ER and then the next couple of days in the best pediatric hospital in the state. Teams of doctors ran every test imaginable to try to figure out the cause. My husband, who is a physician, was not there as the doctors talked through things with me. I knew my husband could have better understood what they were explaining, and I wished so badly he'd been there. This was not ideal. They finally sent us home with a wheelchair and a walker. They had guesses, but they didn't figure out the diagnosis. He spent months in this condition. He could no longer attend school, drive, walk. He couldn't feed himself without spilling his food. Watching him without having any way to make it better was one of the most difficult things I have ever experienced. I had a moment with God, and it was the night that I brought him home from the hospital. I understood what people meant when they say that they felt carried by God. My husband was still out of town and it was really late at night. I was exhausted and I just started sobbing in anguish. I knew many people were praying for us. I felt their prayers and mine being answered at this moment, a miracle, in my opinion. I literally felt a physical presence, a physical difference. It was palpable and I felt God was there with me. Even my husband noticed a difference. when I talked to him, he said he felt like everything had changed. I shifted from fear to faith. I felt confident that I could handle this with him, with God's help. As soon as my husband walked in the door, that feeling or that presence left, and I felt some sort of whatever it was, a withdrawing of that spirit. And this made me feel in a bit of a panic. How was I going to do this without him? But very shortly, I felt a reassurance that he had carried me for as long as I needed. And part of mortality is doing this life on our own. So during the next few months, I was still going through life coaching training, and I got coached by wonderful coaches, and they helped me through this and a lot of thoughts and emotions. But my sister, who's also a certified life coach, shared a thought that she had come up with, and I stole that thought. Then it gave me so much comfort. It was this, that my son will have the exact experience he is going to have, and I trust in my Savior. I have since coached parents on children who are straying from their values, or spouses who've strayed from the family values. Those I have coached have been able to insert their family member's name where I put his name, and it gave them comfort and peace as well. That thought may not work for you, but experiment with a thought that does. You will know when you find it. You will feel better. You're going to feel more at peace, especially as you practice it and believe it. For me, being able to see with spiritual eyes, with a more eternal perspective, the bigger picture, it was essential to being able to feel peace in this situation. And I've learned and am convinced that God's game is the long game. This life is just a dot in the eternities. We are going to have all the answers. Day by day, it can feel really overwhelming and heart-wrenching. But that is the short game. Focus on the long game. I am sure that's what Mary and Joseph did. What you focus on will increase. What you focus on will expand. My advice to myself during this hard time was to stay in the present. The past was really depressing. He's missing his tennis season that he worked so hard for. He used to be able to do ... The future was also anxiety provoking. Would he walk again? Would he be disabled for life? I would choose to intentionally think the thought I shared with you over and over again whenever my brain would start to freak out. I would say it over and over again, and I actually spoke it to my phone, into my phone in a voice memo, and I recorded it so that I could listen to it over and over when I was struggling. I was just really trying to focus on remembering what I was choosing to believe. So instead of letting my brain boss me around and feeling panic, I really worked on intentionally bossing my brain around. And I do this with many thoughts that I'm hoping to adopt. Our beliefs are just thoughts we have practiced over and over again. Are your recurring thoughts helpful in your marriage, in your life? Do they create the feelings and behaviors that you want? Do they help you to show up as the best version of you? Because I know that when I was coached, one coach said that I was catastrophizing about my son's future. And then we looked at my behaviors from that, and I was snappy with my healthy kids and husband because I was fear-focused, not faith-focused, and I wasn't being my best self. So I don't want to leave you hanging. My son has since been diagnosed with narcolepsy with cataplexy, and this is a condition he will have for the remainder of his life. There is medication that has greatly improved his symptoms. He's back at school and driving and working. He isn't able to play tennis anymore or some of the other activities that he loves, but he is doing so much better. And this is one of the big miracles that I was referring to in my last podcast. We really can seek and expect miracles. The interesting thing is that I had peace before the circumstance changed, before he was able to walk and drive and work again. You can too. As I have worked tirelessly to have a sure foundation of Jesus Christ, and because of the coaching work I've done on having a sure mind and deciding what I am going to believe, I can weather any storm. This has even been true of many people, like in Viktor Frankl's book, A Man's Search for Meaning, who was in a concentration camp, and he had zero control over his circumstances, but he always continues to talk about that he did have control over his mind and what he chose to think about the situation. So let's get back to Mary and Joseph. This is conjecture. I can't talk to Mary or Joseph about what may have been going through their minds. But imagine for a moment Mary being very young. It's widely believed that she was a teenager, being pregnant, leaving her family and home, knowing that she would be having a baby in an unknown location with a man she just married as her only support. She wouldn't have her mother or a woman that she knew nearby to support her, and she wouldn't have a woman she knew to show her how to care for an infant. I know that my mom helped me after my first baby, and I remember being so scared to bathe this tiny little 5-pound infant. I cried as I drove away from the airport dropping her off. She'd helped me so much for a week, and I still didn't feel ready to care for this baby alone. And I was 26 years old, probably at least a decade older than Mary. It was scary for me, and I'd even babysat a ton growing up, but I was really insecure about my abilities to care for this baby that was so small. And I've talked to friends who had similar thoughts about how they felt when they had their first babies. So I think being unsure is pretty common. Mary must have had great courage as a young woman to have her first baby under these circumstances. But she also had something even more extraordinary than courage. Bruce R. McConkie wrote that her response to Gabriel, who announces that she will become the mother of Christ, which was, this is what she said, "Be it unto me according to thy will." This affirmation of submission, conformity, and obedience, yes, even anxious willingness to do the will of deity, ranks in sublimity and majesty with the declaration of the pre-existent Christ, who, responding to the Father's search for a Redeemer, volunteered, "Father, thy will be done, and the glory be thine forever." So I think the most amazing characteristic she had was that she was anxiously willing to submit to the will of God. She trusted in his plan instead of her plan, and she was willing to do it his way. Without her mom, without people she knew, all of it. Imagine being a young husband with no medical training, knowing a baby was coming. He didn't have a hospital or a doctor like we have. And really, for a while there was not even any shelter. I'm sure he felt this intense responsibility to protect Mary and the Son of God, to provide shelter and safety to a wife while in labor was kind of important. This wasn't the ideal circumstance for a baby's birth, but I believe Joseph had great courage, and we know that he had help from God. We know he was warned how to keep Jesus safe in a dream, and he was guided all along the way. So how does this relate to your marriage, to your life? Are you anxiously willing to accept God's direction in your life? It will take a great amount of faith. In our day, we have much more control over when we choose to have children, but it can require courage and faith. Even with books and Google searches and birth plans, having children in this world takes courage for some of us. Just like marriage, we can't fully understand the realities of being a parent without being a parent. I have coached couples on this topic. It can be overwhelming to feel like you are ready to be a parent. Life is uncertain. But I love this quote by Ronald Rasband. And he said, "Some years ago, one of our young married daughters and her husband asked Sister Rasband and me a very important, life-influencing question. Is it still safe and wise to bring children into this seemingly wicked and frightening world we live in?" Now, that was an important question for a mom and dad to consider with their dear married children. We could hear the fear in their voices and feel the fear in their hearts. Our answer to them was a firm yes, it's more than okay. As we shared fundamental gospel teachings and our own heartfelt impressions and life experiences, which were the Lord is with us. He's mindful of us and blessing us in ways only he can do. Prayer can call down the strength and the revelation that we need to center our thoughts on Jesus Christ and his atoning sacrifice. The Lord knew that at times we would feel fear. Did Mary and Joseph feel fear? I'm guessing they did. But we know that they had faith in God's plan, which, by the way, wasn't their plan. They let God lead them and show them the way. But you will notice that for much of their journey, and like my journey with my son, we have to do it on our own. God did not descend and give them a safe and a comfortable place for Mary to deliver. He didn't give them a conduit of light that shone down on the stable where Mary would have the baby, but he always gave them instruction and warning when it really mattered. We can also trust in a greater purpose. And in each of our lives and marriages, we can choose to view challenges with an eternal perspective. We can turn disadvantages into advantages with God's help and hope. The wise men even demonstrated willingness to sacrifice, to do all that travel to find Jesus. They traveled far. What sacrifices are we willing to make? Could they include swallowing our pride to improve difficult relationships? The path of the Lord requires sacrifice, and it's not easy, but it's possible. He will help us. What about the shepherds? When they came, their job was to come see what had happened and then testify, tell the world what they had seen and what they had experienced. Did they have to leave their professions to do that? It's possible. Did the apostles, did they have to leave their lives to follow Christ? Joseph and Mary's life, the path, it wasn't straight and it wasn't easy. And my marriage has not been this linear path. There have been plenty of unexpected twists and turns. I've had much to learn, and I'm sure that I have much more to learn ahead. One point I'd like to make about the shepherds is that in Luke 2:16, it says they made haste when they were told to go meet Jesus. And then their task was to just share what they'd seen and heard with the world. As you challenge yourself in the most difficult and important relationships in your life, you will receive revelation. This is one of God's greatest gifts to us. But are you humble enough to receive it? From our last podcast, are you a hard artichoke or are you soft? Are you softening? Are you making haste to act on impressions or personal revelation you are receiving? Don't let your mind talk you out of it. We've all heard of the 5-second rule about food, right? 5 seconds and being your opportunity of, like, once you drop your food on the floor, then you have 5 seconds before it becomes contaminated with any potentially harmful germs that may be present, right? But I've read a book recently called The 5-Second Rule by Mel Robbins, and the method she created is a game changer. She explains the rule as this 5-second rule, and it's simple. If you have an instinct, and I choose to think of an instinct in this case as a prompting from the Spirit, especially in relation to your marriage or into a difficult relationship, you must physically move within 5 seconds or your brain will kill it. And this is what she says. Using the rule is simple. Whenever you feel an instinct fire up to act on a goal or a commitment or a revelation or spiritual prompting, the moment you feel that, you'll feel yourself hesitate on doing something and you know you should do it. Use this rule. Start by counting backward to yourself, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The counting will help you focus on the goal or commitment and distract you from the worries, thoughts, and fears in your mind. As soon as you reach 1, move. That's it. The rule will work every time you use it, but you have to use it. It is a tool. If you stop using it, fear and uncertainty will creep back in and take control of your decisions. If that happens, just start using the rule again. Physical movement is the most important part of the rule too, because when you move, your physiology changes and your mind follows. This works, okay? This works especially for intentionally changing bad habits or starting good habits. I've used it to stop myself from saying something I want to say so bad. I've used it to get myself up at 6 a.m. every morning to do self-care, to do the things I know I would really like to do and that would improve my life and my relationships. I've used it to apologize. I've used it to show appreciation. It's worth experimenting with. Be courageous before your mind can talk you out of it. Act on the impressions you receive and then seek and expect miracles in your marriage and your life. Thanks for being here again this week. If you feel this podcast would be helpful to anyone in your life, please subscribe and share. For free content or extra help, go to charlotteshieldscoaching.com, and we'll see you next week.